So I'm here with Rick, and we're at Carruthers Guitars, and Rick works on the amplifiers here. We're going to do the amplifier survival guide, and we're looking at a vintage Super Reverb amp. What vintage would you say this is?
This one actually, even though it looks like it's from the 60s, it's probably early 70s.
Early 70s?
Believe it or not, blackface was used also in early 70s, where they were using parts and schematics just to get rid of things. So, but this, judging from everything else, unless everything's been replaced, I would say early 70s.
Is that a master volume level one?
No, master volume didn't come in until 1974.
74.
And that usually came in onto the twins and related amplifiers.
Got it.
So this is your survival guide. You ever came to a gig, you turn on the amp, all of a sudden the whole joint goes black? Well, I'm here to show you a couple of things about amplifiers that will help you, hopefully, survive the gig and also survive yourself so you don't get shocked. Because these amplifiers, even when they're unplugged, they carry lethal voltages. This is one time where you should pay attention to that warning. Alright, so what we'll do is I'm going to take this chassis out and we're going to put the tube sides up so I can show you what kind of tubes are in there, what their basic functions are, and what some basic troubleshooting techniques are. Okay, for ease of demonstration, I'm taking the chassis out of the amp so we don't have to go through all kinds of issues on seeing what's what and everything else. This is nice and simple. Okay, these are old tube amps, and this is what you have, what you call a desirable amp. This is a blackface wired amp. Note the nice soft circuit board. It's actually wax impregnated paper. You have all these nice old components. Some of them have been replaced. Notice some modern stuff in there, but it doesn't really change the tone of the amp other than it makes it sound better because you're getting rid of noise. But in the basic survival guide, you should never touch anything inside here unless you know what you're doing. Okay, because there are several components on the underside here underneath this special cap that carry 400 to 500 volts of power even when this is unplugged. They're capacitors. They will hold a charge, sometimes up to days after.
You discharge them?
For this survival guide, you don't need to worry about that. You don't touch these. You don't touch anything inside.
So simply just stay away from that stuff.
Stay away from that stuff unless you know what you're doing. If you think you know what you're doing, stay away from it. If you know what you're doing, go for it. Okay, I pulled this out basically for the simplicity of showing you some tubes, what they do, what their function is, and how to troubleshoot some basic things at the gig. First of all, most amplifiers, especially the older ones, like all the way up to early to mid 70s, they have something called a rectifier tube. It's usually a tube that's closest to the power transformer. A lot of these amplifiers inside have a schematic where they can show you where each tube is and what it does. Okay? In this case, this is a Fender amp. Most Fender amps are built in almost the same fashion. Okay? Whether it's a Super Reverb, Pro Reverb, even a Bandmaster, Bassman, any of those amplifiers, they all have the same theory in mind. They're just using the tubes a little differently to give you different sounds. They also use different configuration of speakers. Okay, so the first tube usually, when you're facing the back of the amp, realistically, it looks like this to you. So basically, we're looking at left to right, but I'm going to turn it over so I don't have to hold it because I'm not Superman yet. Okay, so basically this would be on your right when it's turned over. If you see a tube in this position and it's anything like a 5 AR4, GZ34, any of those tubes, they are power rectifier tubes. They take AC power, the AC power travels through the tube, and the waveforms get rectified. That means they get put together into DC. Okay, because the transformer takes it, raises the voltage, puts it through here, so then it gets rectified. Rectification means taking an AC signal. An AC signal is basically like a sine wave, the top half and the bottom half. That's how AC comes out the wall outlet, and turning it into a straight line, which is DC, direct current. AC, if you touch it, will knock you off. DC will draw you in and make your muscles cramp on it. So that's another reason to stay away from high voltage items and inside. DC will hurt you. Okay, rectifier tubes, usually you'll never have a problem with them until they're 30, 40 years old, and then the only thing that'll happen is the amp will not turn on. It will generally not blow the fuse off the amp. It will generally not, blow up. It will generally not break unless you have a physical force that breaks it. So these are your least worrisome tubes. Usually next to the rectifier tubes, you have output tubes. These are the tubes that couple the output transformer the input signal and the output signal to the speaker. So these are basically between the transformer and the speaker. These are the ones that give you most of the problems because they are running high voltage, high heat, and high demand. Every time you strum a guitar note, it gets sent through all these tubes to these tubes to the big amplification, and then send it out to the speaker.
Which tubes contribute the most to the sound characteristics of the amplifier?
Well, we'll get to that, but those would be the preamp tubes. Okay, the output tubes are pretty much slaves to what's handed to them. Okay,
What needs to be changed most frequently?
output tubes need to be changed most frequently. So here's some safety guidelines. If you turn on your amp, you're at a gig, you turn on your amp and the fuse blows, sometimes it happens because the wall outlet surge is too high. What you do is you take out the fuse and you take a look and you replace it. If it blows again after you replace it and turn it on, like the minute you turn on the on button and you turn on the standby and it blows, suspect that your output tubes are shorted. At this point, you should have an extra set of output tubes with you, because if you don't, you better have an extra amp with you. Because if you try to do a tinfoil bridge or anything like that, you will set the amp on fire. You could possibly set the outlet and the club on fire.
Define what you mean by tube foil bridge.
Well, what happens is some people, they take the fuse out and they're saying, well, I don't have a fuse and the fuse keeps blowing. I'm going to put a piece of metal in there that makes the current run again. Because this interrupts high current draw. If it's too high for what this thing's designed for, this fuse will blow. It'll interrupt the circuit flow and prevent fires. If people put a solid piece of metal in there, or sometimes they stuff aluminum foil, they roll it up and put it in here, and then they run current through that, the aluminum foil doesn't have the reactivity these fuses have. So then whatever is smoldering and burning in here, if this goes first and burns out, then your amp will, set a fire, or at least give you a lot of smoke. If the amp is stronger than what the wall wiring is in the club, then you might have a little smoldering club thing going on. So you don't want to do that. So if it blows the second time, you pretty much can suspect your output tubes. If it's not your output tubes, then it's your transformer. Either way, your amp is unusable. Here's how to find out whether it's your output tubes. What you can do is, a lot of these fender tubes are held in by spring clamps. You spread the spring and you take it out in a circular fashion. Okay? So you do that. And remember, you do this upside down, because I'm just doing this upside, this way for demonstration. So now you have the tubes out. Put them carefully somewhere in case they are good. Put a new fuse in. That's one that's not blown that you know works. Put it in. Turn the amp on. And then turn the standby on. And usually there's a red light in front with just about all amps that indicates that you have power. If the light stays on after 3-4 minutes, you can assume that the amp's going to continue running if you put a fresh set of tubes in. Okay, that usually demonstrates that the tubes were bad, they were shorted out, and you need to put a fresh set in. Mind you, tubes can short out fresh out the box, a week out the box, or they can go 10 years without a single issue. It's always good to have an extra set of tubes with you.